Okay, guys. So let's begin and now talk about height and width in this 15th session of the course. Now, height and width have touched briefly in previous examples as well. As we all know, height means height of a component, and width would basically mean width of a component. And we use these two properties to control the height and width of any component that we have in our code. Okay, so basically, again, the height is used in terms of pixels, or in percentage you can also specify. By percentage we mean that when we use percentage, it would occupy that much percentage of your space on your screen. Okay, the attributes can be that we can set it to auto, which is by this is the default. The browser will calculate whatever the component is inside it based on the components. It will measure the height automatically. The length basically defines in terms of pixels, centimeters, or any EM unit. Usually we use this pixel unit to define that. You can also, as I said, use percentage as we have done it. So it will define that if 50% means 50% of the screen will be basically occupied by this element. No matter how big or small the screen is, the component would always be a 50%. Okay. The initial sets the height and width at its default value. Whatever the default is, we can use that. Inherit will basically means that whatever is the parent container, so if this container is there and there is another parent container, so the height will be inherited from the parent container. So it might have a parent div and it might have a height in it. So inherit means that just inherit the height and width of my parent if you're using that parameter. So this is basically what we do. We set a height and width of the parameter. Let me show you an example where we can implement this. So if I go back inside my code, okay, so in this code we had already created this previous example. So let me just control C this, create a new file, control V, oops, let me delete this, don't save it. From here, control A, control C, create a new file, control V, control S to save it. And in our CSS source code folder, we will be creating an HTML file. And I will name this as, I think 15, right? So this is supposed to be 15, HEIG height, width width dot HTML. Okay. So in this, let me just remove this previous sum of the code, and I will just keep the CSS there. So instead of padding properties, HEIGST height, width width property, and then if I scroll down, let me use delete all this content. I don't want that. Okay, so let's not have unnecessary CSS, and then we can use the heading as CSS. So just trying to reuse, not to write everything again and again. HEIGST height and width width. Okay, so if I save it and close it and then go for a live view again, here's the basic live view of our code. This is again something that we did previous example as well. And now in this we had created an image. Okay, so here's our image, and then we have a div basically that has an h2 in it, so div h2 on it, and then div body in it. Okay, if I talk about image alone, so if I come here, remember we used image as an image and we had a width property as well. So we control the width of any component based on this width. Okay, if I can set the width, for example, just 30 pixels, control S, that means I have a small 30 pixel wide image. I can set it to 300. However, I can specify height as well. So I can say height, and then height can be auto. Usually that's the best practice. That means that whatever is the height of width, that you just adjust accordingly. We can specify manually as well. For example, in this case, 100 pixels. So now my width height becomes 100 pixels and width becomes 300. Same goes for your components as well. So if you have these components like this, basically you can set height and width for these components as well. So if I say width here is 430, I can reduce it, or I can say the height maybe can be, for example, 500 px. So now this component has a 500 height of a pixel. So this image section is basically a div. So if you scroll down here, you will find that we have created a div with this image section, and we specified the width of this component based on our height and width property. So any component that you use, we have used the width previously for the image body as well, basically meaning the width of the component. We have used width for other like image itself. We have used width for the head. No, in fact, not the head. So we can specify width here as well. In this case, we have a text here, but if you want to specify height here as well, so I can say height, and then height can be again, for example, 300 pixels here. Control S. So this basically means that now I'm creating a larger content. And now this has a 300 pixel width. And this is also has like this bit height. Okay, so any tag that you use, you can have height and width specified to it. It will control the height and width of that segments. If you are using padding, do remember in last session we talked in much detail that when we use the padding and the width are basically calculated together. So the overall complete size of this component is basically calculated based on what is the width of the component and what is the padding of the component. Okay. So in this case, width is 280. If I set it to 300, okay, so I set the width to 300, Control S, you will notice that this component is now a little bit bigger than all other segments. That's because it's 300 pixels. Because even the image, if you see, image is also 300, so we assume that it should be same height. This is overlapping now, this is going over. So if there is some other component here, they would overlap. So that's why it's important to understand that when we use width, make sure that the width actually is not the original width that you specify here. Width plus padding left is 10 pixels, so it becomes 310. And then we have a padding right as well, which becomes again, so this becomes 320. So the width total is 320. Now, if I want the image to be here, so if I don't want to alter the content area, so I can come back my image and make sure now my image width is also set to 320. Control S, so that they actually line up together and they look the same spot. Okay, so now it looks more aesthetically pleasing. And similarly, because I have heading which is currently small, I could have a larger heading. So I can say, okay, here's your width as well, bro, and then set the width to also 320. Control S, so that this again becomes 320. Maybe we specify border around this guy as well. If I say border, and I can have 1 pixel of border, and I can say dotted, for example. I can say, let me have Dodger blue, sorry, not Dodger blue, DOTT, dotted and Dodger blue then. So now you will notice that there is a border around this component as well. Okay, but this time we have set it to 320, which basically means that it's very huge. Okay, because we have a left margin as well. So let's just work with this guy and we say, okay, let me be 300. So it now becomes, should become some image heading width, okay, 300 pixels. Control S, so 300 pixels. Oh, okay. We didn't specify the units previously. So now see this is also 320 pixels. So we are using 320, and at the image, again, we have a width 300 because this body has 10 pixels and 10 pixels added to it. Wonderful. Done. Okay, thank you. Let's meet in the next session and we talk more about some of the advanced concepts.